extremely well at a very high level, it's almost like you're jealous, but that you admire. So for me, I would say that kind of creative thing. Like I remember once upon a time I felt I didn't understand these Leningrad structures in the Grunfeld. Yeah. And then you would watch Boris do it and you'd think, okay, I wish I could play it like that. But it's not enough to just study 1 or 2 games.
Can you learn?
Somehow he hasn't. Yes, I believe that you can, especially nowadays. This is probably the most important thing, that you sit with the positions that you're not very good at, and you use the computer to get better at it, because I think you can learn a lot. So in a sense, I would say creativity for me is a subjective thing. For me, what I find creative is what I do badly. Watching others do well, what I do badly. When somebody does the same thing that I do well, maybe it's difficult for me to be as impressed, because I can do it well as well. But when there is something you feel you can learn, then you feel, okay, that is really creative.
So it's more of a skills, not the actual creativity in the mind of some player, like, I don't know, Morozevich, Shirov.
Well, Morozevich, Shirov, I would admire them as well, but in a way, like, I don't think I ever want to do this, but it's impressive that they can do it. So I don't know if that's the right way of putting it, but I always found Morozevich and Shirov, well, a bit too unsound for my taste. I'm generally much more, to use an adjective, I would say classical, than they are. So yes, for me that is impressive. Ivanchuk, in a position that you know very well, he'll suddenly play a move that you hadn't thought of, and you think, actually that is the definition of creative, that something which no one has thought of until now, that suddenly you see that it's even possible. That's the first stage, actually. First you must see that it's legal, and then you see that it's even good in this situation. But there are many, many kinds of creativity like this. There are people who play in games very well, and I've admired that a lot. And you're right, but it's difficult for me to narrow it down to 1 or 2 examples, because there are really a lot. I mean, I'm sure that if you asked me to give you an answer in 10 minutes, I could come up with 5 examples. But if you told me to give you an answer tomorrow morning, I could come up with 40. It's like that. Slowly you think, yes, that one and that one and that one. So. No, I think you constantly learn from everyone you play with. And it doesn't even have to be a strong player. Even a player who does something original or creative and then blunders it and loses the game, you still think, well, but that part he played very well, let me just check. And in fact, as a chess player, you're very curious about that. Whenever you finish a game, even I've finished games in simults, and then I go back and I think, that guy did that thing against me, completely floored me. Wait, now I need to spend a few minutes checking this. Okay. So it's quite a strong urge. It's not always connected to curiosity. It may be just that you didn't understand something or you forgot something, but we want to go back and make sense of it in the broader framework. I didn't know what to do next. Yes, I didn't know what to do next, and I've forgotten what I need to do in this position. I need to put it into something that makes sense to me, and then only then you can move on, something like that. It used to come to me more often. Recently, I would say that I don't think about chess as much as I used to. Maybe it's just that you've come of a certain age or you've tired a little bit, but I don't, when I'm at airports and all, in fact my mind wanders. And unless there was something very recent that happened that is still, it's got my attention, and you got it over in your head.
The past, I don't know, from 90s, from...
No, not so much. More recent stuff. I think, if something I'm wondering about this morning, I will continue to think of it at the airport. But the stuff from 20, 30
Can you
years ago.
switch
I
it?
don't think about it at all. In
Okay.
fact, I remember the events and the memories associated with the event, but not necessarily positions anymore. I think this is full of false positives, in the sense that there are days I've woken up and thought today is going to be a good day. I'm just feeling great, and it has been a great day. And you come back thinking, well, of course, QED. But there are as many days when I wake up and I think today feels really good, and you play a game, and without making excuses, today was one of these days. I felt quite good in the morning, but then I played 2 games, and now you think, how is it possible? I didn't even know I was capable of such bad chess. I mean, you like to think there is some sort of floor below which you cannot sink, and then you find that floor doesn't exist. And this happens to me quite often. One of the things we strive for is to have these early warning signals. It doesn't have to be before the game, it can be during the game. At a certain point, you find yourself thinking thoughts that, well, you would call it unhealthy, but basically what they are is, in previous games, when you've started to have these thoughts, it's ended badly. So there's a negative correlation. You think, when I think this, or when my mind is wandering off to this other subject, or something like that, typically I play badly then. So what you try to tell yourself is, okay, I'm familiar with the situation, it's happened to me before, it's time to pull myself together and try to get into a healthier frame of mind. Sometimes it's enough, sometimes you snap back. But nowadays I find that quite often when I'm at my worst, I have no sign of it coming. I play games that afterwards you think, my moves are so illogical that something went horribly wrong in my head. But if I could figure out what it is, then I would be a better player. I mean, sometimes it's almost like a study. You have to play perfectly to lose this position, because it's impossible to lose it. And then you play perfectly. And the thing is, while you're playing it, every move of yours makes sense in a certain sequence. But then you realize afterwards that it's a total breakdown in your brain, that the entire sequence you got wrong. You made a move thinking it was your best choice under the circumstances. Then sometimes a minute later you realize it isn't, and sometimes you don't. But for me, it would be very nice if I had some way to find this this signal. If I could anticipate it, then it would be very big help for me. Because if you can anticipate it, then the next time if you see it coming, you'll know, okay, it's time to do this or do that. But these days I'm just floored when I'm playing badly. I cannot explain how I can play that badly for 4-5. But there's a breakdown in logic where you sometimes see a very complicated problem, and then you come up with a very elegant solution to that problem, and you miss something that's right in front of you. How to avoid that is a harder question, because I mean, there are times when I try to work on this problem, but I've concluded that when your brain is your enemy, then you can't fool it, you can't bring it back. The better thing is to work on what goes well and try to maximize that, rather than try to stop failure. Because I mean, like today, you can't tell why suddenly this happens, but it just happens, and when it starts, you can't stop it even.
You can't stop it, huh?
Apparently, I'm not able to. Okay. But this is a complicated subject, because I can give you many examples where I have done something about it and I've fixed the problem, but it never fully goes away. You know the expression, old wine in a new bottle? Yeah. For me, my collapses keep on reoccurring in new forms that I don't even recognize.
So it stays, how your brain reacts to different situations stays a little bit a mystery to you.
Yes, I feel that, see, when you're young, a couple of failures, you just brush it off and you play the next event and you think it'll go better, and it does go better. Let's say this is proving harder to do these days, but it was the same 20 years back. I did not know in advance how I was going to, when I was going to play badly. If I knew that, it'll change so much about what you do, but I haven't figured that one out. Yes, experience is one of the main things you can draw on. I think it's very nice when you remember something and you think this is how it worked, and not only at a technical level but also at a psychological level, at an emotional level. If you can remember what works and you can isolate it, then it will improve your results. I often see things that youngsters do that I think, okay, that's a mistake. I see it, but you have to keep a fresh mind. Sometimes they do things better than you. One of the worst mistakes is to think that because you had a problem you couldn't solve, that nobody can solve it. And this is a big mistake you can make, because quite often these days, and again this is one of the areas computers change everything, because they rewrite the script. Well, there might be positions that are just simply impossible for you to play, things that you thought were solved. And then people come up with new ways of doing that, and then suddenly it opens your mind to what is possible in chess. And this, I think if you ever lose this feeling, then you're over. You must always be willing to learn something new. So I think youngsters also do things that I thought, oh, he's making a mistake, because if he does this, he's going to end up in this. And sometimes they surprise you. Sometimes they do it better than you, and you think, oh, wow. Apparently, it's not that it was impossible, it's just I couldn't do it. So you also have to balance it. Sometimes they make mistakes, but sometimes it's just their way of doing things. But you see more and more that every player's personality is very important in the way he approaches a problem. Because what doesn't work for you may well work for him. So it's not the same thing psychologically. Yes, like every generation, my generation built on what the previous generation was playing, and then the same procedure occurs, the same pattern repeats. Also stylistically, they're all, it's almost like they're mirroring us a bit. If you look at Carlsen and Caruana and Maxime and Nakamura, then I'm sure you can pair each one with a player from the past and it'll sort of match. And again, you can see also how people evolve. Hikaru used to play quite differently from what he does now. I think now he tries to be more classical than he used to be, and before he was really much more on sound. But it worked for him because, it suited his style and his nature. And that's the thing, how do you learn something new without spoiling what used to work? I think Caruana is someone who's just an incredibly hard worker. Maybe in this sense, he reminds me of Boris, for instance, or maybe Vladi. I'm not sure who resembles me exactly. I mean, I have this slightly unsound part of me, but at some point I also tried to learn the Soviet school of chess's methods, this systematic study and so on. So, of course, I was wild till I was 20 or 21. Then once I started playing the matches, I think my style evolved a lot. I became aesthetically very conservative.
Because of the matches?
Yes, and because in general, you play top tournaments, you play matches, and you start to become so-called sound, which means you don't do you stop doing a lot of things. I think over time, it's probably done more for me than, done me more good than bad, but clearly later on and nowadays I find it very hard to do unsound things because I mentally trained myself to stop doing it. And it's difficult for me to break out of this also.
Here's some nostalgia a little bit, yeah?
Yes, quite often I look at people who do unsound things and I think it's a pity I don't really have this anymore. I wonder if I could get it back. And then you think, but again, we always face the same problems, but there is never entirely in the same way. So nowadays, there are things you want to relearn, but you have to respect that now our understanding of positions has changed, computers have changed a lot. You have to use new methods to learn old stuff. Well, at the beginning I took to it like a fish to water because it filled the biggest gaps in my chess. My biggest gap in those days was chess knowledge. It simply wasn't drilled into me in the same way. I had enough, but I had this very casual, I would pick up a book, read it, close it, then 2 days later pick up the same book again, read it again. There was nothing very organized or systematic about it. And then suddenly databases came along and it made it so easy for me to have access to all the latest tournaments, and it simplified life a lot in the beginning. I would say the first 5-10 years I took to it like a fish to water. I mainly benefited from it. But that is also because I was at that perfect age where you're not resistant to new knowledge. There is nothing you have an emotional attachment to, and therefore you're unwilling to forget. And you absorb new knowledge effortlessly. So if we look at modern computers and what they show, I find the modern generation is the least resistant. They're the ones for whom it doesn't contradict a lifetime of learning.
Yeah.
So at the beginning I would say it's a huge help, but of course the computer revolution didn't stop. It continued and it picked up speed. And so there are periods when I found that I couldn't keep up, I found it hard to adjust. And I've brought up this topic of learning and relearning because it's very important. First of all, you know that we can almost forget everything Steinitz told us. Not forget in its entirety, but there are so many details, that so many nuances that you cannot just say over piece once and this and that. Those rules don't make sense anymore. But even the rules that I thought I grew up with, suddenly, I mean that it's possible to be too dogmatic in chess. And there are no longer, I think, this concept of just the best moves. There are all sorts of moves, and each one has a stylistic component. They're not right or wrong. They're stylistic, and it's the sequence that can be right or wrong. So if you can play what we used to consider a bad move, but if you then are tactically very accurate, then it works. And probably that's the biggest difference between the younger generation and me nowadays, is that I think they suffer less. They also find it difficult. So I shouldn't exaggerate, but I think they suffer less. Whereas for our generation, very often we get into a position where we think this must be good. And it's quite a shock when you go back home and you check it and you realize that it isn't good. And then there is actually quite some learning in sitting and checking it slowly and realizing why it isn't good. But yeah, it's tough.